Thank you, Shauna. When it comes to climate action, we can likely all agree we want to rapidly decarbonize in a way that is equitable. But what steps should we take specifically to achieve that goal? What policies? What programs? I'm delighted to be joined by two leaders who have a long history of fighting climate injustice and inaction, and today are in positions of influence. Shalanda Baker went from teaching and writing and organizing as a professor at Northeastern University and co-founder of the Initiative for Climate Justice to becoming Deputy Director for Energy Justice at the US Department of Energy. Jerome Foster II went from protesting outside of the White House every week as a leader of the youth climate strikes to working inside it as the youngest member on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, known as WEJAC. So, Jerome, Deputy Director Baker, welcome to Verge.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Jerome, I want to start with you. So, the voice of youth is sometimes marginalized as naive, and there's a meme about getting older and moving from the idealism to the pragmatism. How do you keep the purity of your moral compass now that you have a seat at the table?
Yeah, I think that being an activist in the White House and always being in touch with my activist friends that are organizing on the front lines, it's very easy to keep with my moral conscience because we know we're fighting for our future and we know we're fighting for our lives. And still being a young person, like I'm still only 19 years old, I still understand that this is my future that I'm fighting for. And like every time I look around, I know that there's urgency and I know that there's a need for moral clarity in government. That's the whole reason why I'm here. Like every time I hold a climate strike, I was like, our government needs moral clarity, political leadership, and more young people. And we finally have young people at the table. So this is our opportunity to make change and start shaking things up and make sure action is taken in the timeline that's most effective.
Deputy Director Baker, now that you have the opportunity to focus your work into programs, how do you prioritize and how do you balance the political realities with the physical realities of the climate crisis?
Wow. So first of all, I just want to say I am so excited to share the stage with Jerome. I mean, what a leader and what an inspiration. It's just really breathtaking to see how our young people have taken the lead in this climate emergency. I think for me, it's easy to keep my eye on the ball. My boss likes to say her hair is on fire. So Secretary Jennifer Granholm, came in with the priority to avert the climate crisis, but also create great jobs in communities that are on the front lines of this climate disaster. So for me, it's very much easy to stay focused on that. And I think, I came in with a lot of priorities, but understand that every single day I'm working for those who are on the front lines. I mean, this role is one that was never created, right? It's a new role for this administration and very much speaks to our president's priorities, which are to center the climate crisis, racial justice, economic justice, and then my own boss's priorities, which are to create jobs in those communities and make sure that all of us are made better in this energy transition. So I'm off to the races. There's never a dull moment at the DOE.
And Jerome, I know that WEJAC is also brand new. I believe it was created as part of Joe Biden's executive order on tackling the climate crisis, which was signed in January, and the council came together in March. So can you tell us what WEJAC is and what role it plays in influencing policy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just also want to say just what an honor and a pleasure it is to share the stage with Ms. Baker. It's when I joined the White House, I was like looking for people who had been making change for so long and trying to model that after people like you. So it's so great to finally have a discussion and peer past the page and have this really in-depth and nuanced dialogue together. So it's really great. Also going back to your question, the WEJAC is the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. We work to really make sure that we're prioritizing disadvantaged communities and people at the front lines with what we're calling Justice 40, where the 40% of investment benefits will go to people that are at the front lines of the climate crisis. And our job as the WEJAC is to make sure that the investments are going to the right communities, and also ensuring that we identify disadvantaged communities correctly, that it makes sure that people, that Black and brown people, that indigenous folks, women, non-binary people, so many people that have been left out of these investments that they needed are now going back and making sure that justice is available to them. And yeah, I think that it's just a plethora of things that we're working on, and Justice 40 is just the first thing. So it's really big, and we're excited to keep pushing forward on it.
I have to say, the love and respect that you two have for one another is so heartening to me, and I think really reflects how we have the right people in the positions for these jobs. I've been such a fan of both of your work, so it's great to see how you two respect each other and work together. Deputy Director Baker, one thing I've been wondering about, last summer, there was this national moment of collective racial awakening following the murder of George Floyd. A year and a half later, how do you see that awakening reflected in the way that we are talking about racial justice, and especially in regards to energy access and climate policy?
Wow. I mean, for me, the murder of George Floyd still resonates. You know, it resonates with my work. It resonates in terms of how I think about the injustices across so many sectors of society. You know, our president on day one issued an equity order, and that's Executive Order 13985. It's not one that people talk about in the climate space, but it absolutely intersects with the order that you mentioned and Jerome talked about in some links, which is 14008, the Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad executive order, where the Justice 40 initiative gets announced. And for me, the Justice 40 initiative is about reckoning with racial and structural inequality. We don't always think about the energy system as a site of oppression, as a site of injustice, but we know that today communities of color are breathing in the toxins and hazards of our energy system. And you know, we're committed to ensuring that those environmental justice burdens are reduced, mitigated, eliminated, eradicated, right? We also know that communities of color routinely are facing higher energy burdens in this country and experience energy insecurity, which is lack of access to reliable energy, at higher rates than other portions of our society. I mean, one example is Latinx and Hispanic households are experiencing energy insecurity at a rate of 45%, and Black households at a rate of 52.2%, and Native First Nations households are experiencing energy insecurity at a rate of 61.5%. And energy insecurity can sound abstract, but this is engaging in dangerous behaviors like keeping the heat low, so low that you might freeze and die, which has happened in certain households around this country. It's using, you know, things like boiling the water on the stovetop to warm your bath water at night, which is how I grew up actually. And it's using the oven to warm the home, where you see households, family members huddled around a stove and oven just to stay warm in America. And so energy insecurity, energy burden, environmental injustice are the ways in which racial inequality and racial injustice manifest within our energy system. And I am committed every single day to eradicating those problems. And that is what I'm focused on, and what I wake up thinking about, and what I go to bed thinking about. Because last night, a child went to bed with asthma in her or his lungs because of the way our energy system is structured. Last night, a family member bundled up because they couldn't afford the heat. So, you know, these faces are faces that are real for me, and this is what I go to bed thinking about every single night.
Yeah, and reflects why this work is so important. We've been talking about this from the vantage of US policy and the inequities we see in this country. And of course, climate is a global problem and it needs global action. It also, the inequities of climate are exacerbated between the inequities between countries. And Jerome, I'm curious to hear how you see the work you're doing as plugging into the larger global climate discussions that are going on.
You know, when we talk about climate justice, and especially in the global context, it's it's a mimicry of the United States, because there is so much inequity when it comes to communities that have been colonized and have seen racism at firsthand, that are now dealing with the climate crisis first and worse. And I think when we look at the context of America, we can see that for decades and for longer than that, there's been exclusionary zoning. There's been legislation that wrote off access to clean water, and there's even been delayed or oftentimes no assistance when there's natural disaster hitting Black and Brown communities. That's the same thing that's happening on the international stage when it comes to communities that have been colonized, like the African continent, like Southeast Asia, and like South America. They are now seeing that they've polluted the least, but countries that have polluted the most are continuing to not give aid for the destruction they have caused. So when we broaden it to the larger international context, we have to make sure that countries are fulfilling their Paris Climate Accord agreements, where they would give international aid to countries that are being impacted by climate change. And there's a whole host of other things that countries need to be doing to make sure that global South countries and communities, the countries at the front lines, aren't facing the consequences of a problem they didn't cause. So that's really what has to change on the international stage, is a sense of empathy and compassion to countries that had little to no impact.
There are many corporations that are within the VERGE community, and that multinational corporations obviously play a huge role in this challenge also. And Deputy Director Baker, what role do you see these multinational companies playing in global actions? And is there anything that gives you hope or you wish they were doing better?
Sure. So, I started my career in energy justice and in academia, really looking at the ways in which corporations were impacting communities on the ground. I mean, my very first research project was examining the impact of large-scale wind energy development in communities in Oaxaca, and specifically in indigenous communities in Oaxaca, Mexico. And so there is absolutely a role that they can play in mitigating harm and averting this climate disaster, this climate emergency that we are in today. I think, understanding how they interact with communities first and foremost. Engaging communities before a project, a clean energy project, kind of comes into fruition, and making sure that those communities are engaged in the planning process. I think also recognizing that supply chains themselves have to be diverse. And so again, thinking about the US context in particular, we absolutely need to make sure that Black and Brown businesses are a part of this transition. So our supplier diversity, the role of supplier diversity cannot be overstated in this particular moment, because we know that lots of resources are going to flow through our economy as a result of this transition. And we have to make sure that the most diverse members of our society are a part of it. So there's a lot that corporations, multinational entities can do right now. Engage communities, look at your supplier diversity, and be a good steward, for the environment. So those are things that I'm thinking about, and things that I'm talking to our corporate partners about as well.
And a follow up on that, you were just talking about that stakeholder building, and I'm struck by the urgency of this moment in climate. It isn't just about moving quickly, it's also about getting it right, because we don't have time to try again. And can be a disconnect between the speed of consensus building and the process needed to include all communities and the speed demanded by the climate crisis. How can we address this tension and include stakeholders in a meaningful way?
Well, if we don't engage stakeholders in this transition, we're going to fail. The solutions that we create will be ill-suited for the moment. And so, it means that we have to learn from those who have been organizing on the ground for decades. We have to listen to our leaders. We have to really lean into organizations like WEJAC and, the various constituencies that WEJAC represents. And as a government, we have to learn how to engage communities in a different way. And so I think this administration is absolutely committed to that. I'm committed to that at the Department of Energy, holding stakeholder engagement meetings, meeting with stakeholders in smaller settings to really ensure that we are listening, and not just listening, but taking back what we learned. and baking that into the things that we're building, because I absolutely believe that communities have the solutions to get us out of this climate disaster and climate emergency.
Jerome, final question. In your transition from going from the outside of the White House to the inside, what surprises you or gives you hope?
I guess what surprised me was the speed of progress, and that oftentimes it doesn't match the speed of the climate crisis and things that are needed. And oftentimes I have to put my activist hat back on and say, like, we still need pressure from the outside, because a lot of elected officials, if we don't hold them accountable, they're not going to represent the people that voted them there. So I think that when we talk about the climate crisis, we have to always know that, like, even though we're on the inside, it doesn't just magically allow us an in to like pass any bill or make any progress that we want. It's still like those people that are stymieing progress, that are sitting there just being like buckets of money that the fossil industry gives money to. It's like, hey, if you're coming here to help us with this, then help. Don't just sit there and like just be on the sidelines and stop all the progress that we've made. So being on the inside, it shows that like we still have to keep pushing, and we still have to sometimes vote people out that are continuing to not stand with our future and stand with the fact that we need justice and clean air and clean water.
Well, Deputy Director Baker, Jerome, it is truly a pleasure to be talking to you today. Thank you for joining us at Verge.
Oh, absolutely. Such an honor, really.
Yeah, it's been a great time talking to you guys. Yeah.
I'm Sarah Golden for GreenBiz. Back to you, Shauna.